Got a quick lens review for you today. This is the 7Artisans UFO lens. This wasn't a sent product. I picked this up myself. Thought we'd have a look at something a little bit different to some of the other lenses that I've looked at. Not much to see on the packaging with this, just the QR codes. It does come with a fairly decent little pouch where you can store it in, and you have the drawstrings on that. Keep your eyes open on the price for this. I've seen it vary quite a bit. I managed to pick this up for around about €50. First thing to comment on is the design. It's not going to be to everyone's taste. It does have that sort of Da Vinci type thing going on there with the Roman numerals, but it is very small, very compact, as you would expect for a body cap lens. There's no plastic on this. It's solid metal throughout. You've got the grooves on the side there. Only thing I've noticed is that the front element does pick up some dust, so you might want to get a little brush or a blower brush to clean that off. I'll just do some close-up macro shots now just to give you an idea of the finishing on the lens. Here's a quick specification on the lens. It's fixed focus and it's also fixed aperture. I will be testing the focus distance a bit later on, and I also put the equivalent focal length up on screen. It depends on the sensor you're using. I've got it on APS-C, so I'll just show it to you on the camera, and it is an interesting look. I'm not sure everyone's going to like it. Personally would just go for a plain black rather than the Roman numerals. With the top down view, you can see there it's only really the center part that sticks out a little bit, and it's really no bigger than the body cap on the camera. Testing the focus distance, the first rock or stone is 60 centimeters, the one in the middle 1 meter, and the one at the back is 2 meters distance. And if I zoom in, you can see it's still not quite in focus at 60 centimeters. You need to go up to around about 75-80 centimeters to start to get things in focus. So I'm not sure where the 35 centimeters came from on their specifications. You can double that. Perhaps it's a typo, so do bear that in mind. You really don't have any close focus with this lens. Taking a look at the resolution now, and I've just done a quick test shot, and we'll start in the middle. It's actually quite good. It's pretty sharp, good details and resolution. What you'll notice is on the edges and corners it does drop off, although I wouldn't say it was horrible. There's a bit of blurring there, but I suppose about 80-85% of the frame is pretty sharp. There's a moderate amount of barrel distortion on this lens, but you'll notice more than that is the darkening or the vignetting in the corners. It is quite strong. You can correct the dark corners, but I'm not sure exactly that people are going to do that because you get a sort of specific look with this type of lens. Unfortunately, we're still on a lockdown over here, so I don't have a huge amount of subjects to look at, but I did manage to get some tree shots, and there is some chromatic aberration, more so on the edges of the image. It's quite easy to remove. I just did a single click to take that away. So I wouldn't worry too much about the chromatic aberration on this lens. There isn't a lot of sun around at the minute, so I've done a few simulated tests with an LED torch for lens flare, and it can be quite wild depending on the angle that you're at. So there's a few different samples that I've given you there, and it can be a little bit psychedelic. I'll just walk through a few samples that I took now when I was out and about, a couple of walks that I went on. And the first thing to note, obviously you can't really control depth of field much with this lens. Once you're about 70 or 80 centimeters, everything's in focus. Before that, it's not so much out of focus, it's only very mild blur effect that you'll get. It does take time to get used to the shooting, the fact that you can't actually get that close to subjects, so you have to remember that if you're thinking about moving in on any objects or using it as part of the framing or composition. Out of the camera, it's actually quite neutral image from this lens. It doesn't have a ton of contrast in it, particularly if I compare it to some of my Minolta lenses from the 80s, which are quite contrasty lenses. Generally speaking, I'm not into the presets and filters that much, but with this lens I found it sort of encourages you to try out different looks. I think that's partly down to the fact you have that fairly strong darkening in the corners or vignetting, and that sort of gives it a preset look of its own really, which some people quite like the vignetting on the images. It adds more of a retro or old style feel or vintage effect to the image. So here's a few samples on screen for you. Could be into the desaturated look, the sort of faded look, or even you could add the contrast in there if you wanted to give more of a punchy image, and it can work quite well for black and white as well. Because you don't have any real control over the depth of field, all you're really left to worry about is the composition and if you've got the shutter speed high enough, things like that. So it does sort of free you up in a way. So initially could appear quite limiting as a lens, but obviously it's not going to be your first choice for a landscape lens if you're looking for edge-to-edge performance. If you're into the candid or casual photography, it could be a useful lens to have, simply because it's so pocketable. It really doesn't add anything at all to the camera, virtually no weight and size. So what I found was I was tending to use different angles a lot more than I would normally do with, say, a zoom lens, and that includes tilting it, and also because it's so light you can put it down quite low and give a different perspective on things. Not sure that design of the lens is going to appeal to everyone, but I did have a bit of fun playing around with this, and it does give you a different take and a different approach to photography, which can be quite useful. Be interested to hear your thoughts on this lens, whether this would be something that you would consider getting, or do you consider it a gimmick? Thanks for watching, do appreciate it, and I'll catch up with you in my next video coming very soon.